if I'm going to describe what's happening in our country right now, we have a fatherhood challenge, but a family crisis.
Yeah.
Fatherhood challenge is that we have not figured out how to begin to look at fatherhood as the solution to many of our societal ills. And as a result of that, we are creating a family crisis.
Hmm.
And that is for everybody.
Mhm.
Right. And so when we begin to start looking at fathers as a solution to many of the things that we're going in, what does that look like? It looks like supporting them. It looks like empathizing with them. It looks like recognizing them. It looks like inspiring them. It looks like, it looks like all of those things. Right. And so once you start doing those kinds of things, you'll begin to start seeing things stabilize, a little bit in family.
You are listening to Dedicated Joe, the new dad's guide on the upending and transformational experience of becoming a father. My guest today is Kenneth Braswell, the CEO of Fathers Incorporated. He has spent more than 3 decades working with over 1 million different fathers across the country through federally funded programs, helping men become better fathers. Now, Kenneth has 6 kids himself, ranging from ages 17 to 45 years old. And we discuss a lot of the macro trends that really impact fatherhood and how supporting dads is really a community issue. We also discuss the things that make men leave and how we create better fathers by help building up better men. Really great conversation. Check it out. You've been doing this so long. I think you might be the most legacy dad influencer I've talked to.
I'm sure I'm not, but
30 years? I'm pretty sure nobody's been a dad influencer for 30 years that I've talked to. So pretty great. We met because you were gracious enough to have me on your show, which was super great conversation. And you've been doing this a long time.
Yeah, and you are on our list too. You're on our short list. Remember I was telling you about we're doing this national conference in Dallas in August. So you are on the list of reviews. And so, but we have to wait for the administration to get back. And so, but I've told people about you. So I'm hoping that will happen sooner than later. I'm looking forward to having you there.
It'd be fun. Get me on the national stage.
Yeah, absolutely.
But what is your story? How did you become a fatherhood expert? What drew you to this?
My issue was fatherlessness and the pain that derived as a fact of not having my father in my life and becoming aware of all of the things that hole manifested in my life. And then almost reconstructing the same pathway in my own early life that my father constructed in my life. My not-for-profit work at that time was to begin to start looking at that as an issue, but then something interesting happened, which is, the mother of my youngest daughter and myself broke up. And so fatherhood was just like right in my face. And it was at that moment that I had the epiphany that this is not going to happen again, because I already had one daughter, my oldest daughter, who, spent a lot of her early life not around me, and I was just not going to allow that to happen again. And then through some personal circumstances, I was already doing not-for-profit work and just decided that, you know what, I'm going to go after doing this work with fathers and figuring out what it was. And the field was in its infancy, so there really wasn't, and it still isn't, a lot of administrative infrastructure around it, right? There's a lot of us out here doing a lot of different things in the space, but there's no association, there's no lobbying circle, there's none of that stuff that surrounds other social issues around the country. Fatherhood hasn't gotten there yet, so we are still young in that space. And then created Fathers Incorporated in 2004, and the rest, as they say, I won't say history because I'm not done. And so just decided that what I wanted to do in the early part of my career was really do capacity building and technical assistance and helping people really understand how to work with dads. And then when I moved from New York to Atlanta, really got into a space that I was in before, and I said I would never get back into it because that's hard work and that's direct service. And when I got here in Atlanta, decided to do direct service, and I'm better for it.
Mm. Yeah. So you grew up without a dad.
Yeah.
Your whole life, do you remember him at all?
So I have an interesting way of describing him when I say when I met my dad, and I always say when I met my dad for the second time. Like, I have a vague memory of seeing him when I was younger. I don't know, Joe, if it's a dream. I don't know if it's something I just made up in my mind and it's stuck and has become real in my psyche, or it really happened. I can't confirm that. But when I met him for the first time, the second time, I was 23 years old. I had just gotten out of the military. A friend of his ran into my mom in a shopping district near our house in Brooklyn. Said that, she thought that um, Doug, which is my biological father's name, would love to see me. They connected, they called, he called, and the next thing I was pulling up on his apartment in Coney Island, New York, to meet him, and his family with my young wife and my 2-year-old daughter, my first daughter, um, and just being nervous as I don't know what, not knowing what to expect. And then shortly thereafter, probably about a year and a half after that, he passed away. And so I really wasn't able to reconstruct the storyline. It was just me putting pieces together, and also tearing some things apart that I had made up in my own mind about who he was and why he did what he did, to which I found out wasn't true. And so I had to deconstruct, construct, deconstruct, construct. And I think I probably have a really good handle on it now, but I can still see some holes in the story. I can still see some spaces in the story that I would love to kind of fill with who he was, who he really was, what was going on when when my mother and him did not stay together, and how did that transpire. I'll probably never know that stuff. And so, but what I remember growing up is a life without my father and my.
Yeah. And then you meet him just right before he dies, basically. Like, I mean, you barely
Yeah.
ever got to meet him. And then this was with your first kid and and you said your first wife.
Yes, my first wife.
And then that led into you guys splitting up and you almost repeating the same pattern.
Yeah, almost. But I call my youngest daughter, in Zenga, I call her my game changer, because when I had my first child, I was only 17 years old.
Hmm.
You talking 1980, just getting out of the 70s, right? And so it's 1980. She's born. But I lived in a community in Brooklyn that was still traditionally sound, right? They were the community that if you were a young man and you got someone pregnant, you married her.
Hmm.
That's what you did.
Mhm. Mhm.
Brooklyn, New York, where I grew up in Crown Heights, is one of the more interesting communities in Brooklyn at the time, probably still is. The makeup demographically of Crown Heights is 1/3 Hasidic Jews, 1/3 Puerto Ricans, and 1/3 Southern blacks.
Huh.
And so there was a lot of culture where I was. There was a lot of like thick, really thick culture. But ironically, family culture was similar. Although we had our cultural nuances, the whole sense of what family meant to the Jewish community, to the Latino community, and the Southern Black community were very similar. And so that is what I grew up in. That is what I knew to understand from my own lens. When we got married, I was 19 years old. I was how I describe myself today, young and dumb, right? I just was doing what I thought was the right thing to do based on what elders in my community said I should do. We got married at a justice of the peace in Brooklyn, New York. I was actually in the military at that time. And so shortly thereafter, her and my daughter came to El Paso, Texas, where I was. And a whole nother kind of life ensued for me, yet another life that I had no backdrop to. I didn't
Mhm.
know what being married meant. I didn't know what having a child meant. I didn't know what being on my own meant. And I'm still young. Both of us are young. We were only like 6 months apart. So we're both 18, 19 years old trying to start a family in a town that was 3,000 miles away from where we grew up, in a space that I was unsure that I should even be in, which was the military, right? And so that was kind of, and it wasn't until I came back home that's when I met my dad. And so all of this stuff is going on at the same time.
Yeah, and you're still a kid yourself,
Yeah,
so
basically. So
so
I literally
yeah,
had a baby, got married, and got divorced in 2.5 years.
wow.
In
And
two and a
joined the
half.
military and met your dad for the first time.
Yes, in
Wow.
3 years. There's
And
all
then
this.
your dad died right after that and then lost your
Yeah.
dad. God, I'm in
Hmm.
law.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Man, you've become an expert on why men leave and how to prevent that. But before we get into that, what similarities were there when you eventually split up and got separated from your daughter were to what the story of your dad?
What I have come to learn about my dad, um, I learned a little bit of information from my mom in an ironic way. And so I'm into this fatherhood work in the beginning stages. And in 2013, I decided that I was going to do a documentary called Spit and Anger to explore this whole notion of particularly men and boys and the anger that they have as a result of not having their fathers around. So I do this film, Joe, and I start moving it out there because I'm already in the fatherhood space. Many people knew me, and I'm moving this thing around the country, and it's in film festivals, and it's just moving. And so, but it is changing lives everywhere I go, right? Because it's me telling my very, very raw story about, how that anger was consuming, my life. And so this one evening, we're in North Carolina. We had 3 colleges to go to. And I get a phone call. And the phone call is the president, at the time, Barack Obama, is starting an initiative in Washington, D.C. called My Brother's Keeper. And there's an invitation for you to come and see this thing unveiled.
Whoa.
So I turned to my mom and I'm like, hey, we were in North Carolina. And I was like, nah, you know what? I'm good. I can watch it on TV. And my mom was like, what? You get a chance to go into the White House to be in the same room as the president and you don't want to go? And I was like, and so obviously I ultimately went. And so, but that night we had a showing at, at AT&T, at A&T. And so my mom says, I can go and represent you. And so now at that point, my mother had never seen the documentary. She hadn't seen it yet.
No.
And so my nephew, who also lived in High Point, North Carolina, came over to go with her to represent me at the school. Fast forward, I go to DC. It's a great event. They do what they do what they do. I come back. I get to the hotel. I walk into the hotel, Joe, and the lights are off. And I'm like, where's my mother? And so I walk into the hotel room and I look over and I see this shadow. And it's my mother sitting on the couch with the lights off. And I said, hey, I was like, what's going on? I didn't even turn. I'm like, hey, I was like, you all right? You good? And like, she's not saying anything. And I'm like, what's going on? And the first words out of her mouth was, I didn't know. And I said, you didn't know what? She says, I had no idea what the impact of not having Doug in your life had on you until I saw this and saw you tell this story. What that stimulated was my mother telling me some things that I had never known before about my dad. The number one thing, and I won't go into a lot of what she told me, but the number one thing that actually even impacted our relationship afterwards was it wasn't him that left. It was my family, her family, that chased him away and told him that she didn't need him, that they would raise me, that they didn't need him around. And as a result of that, they moved her and I. That's how we got to New York. They moved us to New York to move away from him. And so we're talking We talking the 60s. There ain't no Facebook, no Instagram, no social media. Like, you can't find people back then. People move and disappear across town and never seen again if that happens. And so it disrupted the story I had been telling myself about my father. But the issue and the challenge was my mother had the keys to unlock that story all along, and she never unlocked it for me. And so for like the next 2 years or so, we had a really strange relationship. And at this point, he's dead and gone. So I can't even reconcile that with him. And now I have to restructure. And I'm in the middle of doing this fatherhood work at the same time.
Yeah.
And I got this film that is about anger and resentment. And now I have to totally reconstruct that whole story. That was the beginning of this work for me. I laugh and joke, Joe. There used to be a commercial that used to come on TV for hair replacement system, and the guy used to come on and he used to always say, "I'm not only the president, but I'm a client." Like, that was me in this work of responsible fatherhood. I'm not only the CEO of Fathers Incorporated, but I'm also a
Yeah,
client.
you're doing it for yourself. Yeah.
Yeah. And everything that I'm trying to do for everyone that I touch, I am trying to heal myself at the same time. But the crazy thing that's happening in the mix of that is I'm watching that is, you talk about theme, that is the common theme, Joe, for us in this space, talking about men's issues, father issues, and we're trying to get to the root of what the issue is. And the theme is, even though we are trying to do our best to reconcile those things, everybody still is struggling with their own story.
Yeah. And yet it's almost like if you aren't, you almost shouldn't be trying to do it. If you can't heal yourself, how could you possibly heal anybody else? And healing isn't a permanent thing you just finish. Like, "Oh, I'm healed now, so now I'm gonna heal everyone else." It's not
Right.
like a broken leg and I walk now. It's like, no, it's like a permanent, you integrate the wound
Yeah,
daily.
but right. If you think about it from that analogy's perspective, right? So we think we're healed, but we're functioning through the pain and we're ignoring the pain because I'm saying to you, Joe, I'm not hurting. I'm fine. I'm good. See, it's working. And you're like, you matching my energy. Yeah, dude, you good. It's working. And we matching each other's energy. We both functioning in pain, thinking that we're healing, and we're not. We're ignoring the pain and we're masking it from everyone else. That is the common theme that I have seen in this work, and it still permeates today. Not only does it permeate in individual lives, but it also permeates through systems, right? Because systems are run by humans and they're implemented by humans, and they're humans who are trying to do a good work, but they're trying to do a good work through pain. And so the whole emphasis of me in the beginning of my career for doing this work is because I was trying to ignore the pain and help others not be in pain, but I was still in pain myself. And the pivotal point in my space was when I was doing the film, and the producer at the time, director, a good friend of mine, in interviewing me, asked me how come I wasn't in the documentary, because in the beginning I wasn't in the documentary. And my response to him was, I want to tell the story. I don't want to be the story. And so he was like, what? And so he goes down a line of questioning with me then, and then he hits me with this. He says, aren't you a Christian? And I'm like, absolutely. He says, so you're trying to do a good work based on the fact that you hate somebody. So you're doing your work, you're trying to do love work through hate.
Oof.
And I said, yeah. That changed my whole perspective. And then where I landed, just to kind of, bring this ship around, where I ultimately landed was the Bible, for those who are believers, only has one instruction when it comes to mother and father, and that's in the commandments.
Mhm.
And the instruction is honor. Doesn't say you have to like. It doesn't say you have to get along with them. Doesn't say you have to live with them. Doesn't say any of those things. It just says love and honor thy mother and father. Honor means giving them the appreciation and recognition for the fact that they brought you into this world. That's it. All the other stuff has to work itself out. But your ultimate and only command is that no matter what that circumstance is, at minimal, you have to honor them. And when I came to that point, it settled everything in my soul. And I was able to sit back and say, you know what? Yeah. If it wasn't for whatever the storyline is or whatever the storyline was, I wouldn't be here and I wouldn't be able to do this work. And this pain that I'm trying to function through to save others is actually not a pain, it's a blessing. I had to flip
Yeah.
how I was functioning.
Well, and what an incredible way to honor him, but to serve men like him that were in his position. You easily could have um, gone down the path of serving boys who had been abandoned. Like you could have created programs that were for guys like you that grew up with the dads, and this is how you integrate the anger and blah, blah, blah. But instead, you decided to go after the dads. How do we
Yeah.
heal dads and try to maybe prevent this situation from ever even happening again?
And then God does this really interesting thing to me now, 17 years ago. I have 5 children, 4 biological, but 5 children. And I had 4 girls. And my last child was a surprise blessing. And he was a boy. I had done a lot of things in my life, but the only thing that I think I had not done was to raise a boy. And this, now man child, right, has never not known his father in his life. He's never awakened in his house without his father, without not knowing where his father was. Now, I wasn't there every night, the challenge, and I travel. But he knows no level of father absence, right? It is foreign to him. He can't even, if I was going to have a conversation with him, he could not even construct what that would look like. And in a very ironic way, there are these moments from him being an infant all the way up until now where we are engaging with each other, and I have this small piece of me that asks me this very quiet question. That's an inquisitive question. I can't answer it, but I can only answer it through how I function with him. And it is, man, I wonder what it must feel like to have my dad with me when I'm doing X, right? And I'm looking at him and I realize that there are moments where I am vicariously raising myself through him. Right. And so it
Well, we
brings
all
it
are doing, ultimately.
right.
Yeah. The essence of parenting is reparenting ourselves.
Yeah,
You chose to do
absolutely.
it with a boy and then also teach all these other men.
Right.
Do it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what have you learned about the patterns around why men leave? What has been some of the most impactful societal changes or personal changes men can make to avoid going down that path that eventually ends in divorce
Yeah.
or abandonment?
Yeah. So, there is a lot. We can spend the next 2 hours talking about the systems that are in place that impact fathers and why they do what they do. But I think there's something that happens, before then that we have to begin to start thinking a little more about, when it comes to why we do what we do. So one of the things that I've learned in doing this work with both now moms and moms and dads and families and co-parenting and marriage and relationships and all these other kinds of things when it comes to gender roles. And I'm a in general guy. I'm not an all. So all doesn't count. It is in general. Whenever you see programmatic activity around moms and the construction and implementation of programs for moms, when those things are created, when they are implemented, they never disconnect the fact that a mom is a woman. So they take into consideration everything that they do with moms and connect it to the fact that she is also a woman. So there are things that she does as a mom that she does because she's a woman, not because she's a mom. Or there are things that she does the way she does them because she is a woman, not because she is a mom. But whenever you start thinking about the programmatic activities when it comes to men, we always want to disconnect the fact that dads are men and that there are certain things that men do, right? That are the exact reason why we do the things sometimes dads do, right? That we expect that just because you're a dad, you are supposed to dismiss everything about you that is a man, right? And you have to make decisions because you're a man. It's like, those two things come together for me. And give you for instance. And so if you are doing program activity with fathers and you are trying to get them to open up and talk, engage them, recruit them for programs, and your only conversation with them is about the responsibility that you have to do XYZ, 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 and you're talking to me like I'm a child, and you're talking to me like I don't want to do what I'm doing, and you're trying to chastise me and do all the other things that you're trying to do. And you don't take into consideration that I'm also a man.
Yeah, they
And
talk to
that,
you like a boy.
yes.
Mm-hmm.
And
They
so
don't even
when I,
talk to you like a woman. Like they wouldn't talk to a woman that way.
right,
So it's like, even if they talk to you like a woman, it might not work, but they wouldn't treat a woman like, you have this responsibility for your baby, and how dare you, take a phone call while you're breastfeeding. It's like, no, moms already have all that. They're like,
the
yeah,
minute
interesting.
I start responding like a man, all of a sudden that's an indictment on me and the kind of father I am. No, you invoked something in me that is part of the nature of who I am. And now when that thing comes out, you want to minimize me for being a man, yet all of your conversation is about me being a man. But what you don't want is you don't want me to be a man as long as I'm not doing what you want me to do.
I suspect that this comes from the idea that that parenting is a mom's job. That there's
Mm-hmm.
moms and parenting, and that this stereotype that the dad's job was to go into the world and make money and create the house. And so in some ways, being a man and being a dad was the same. Like, to be a dad was to be a man, which is to create
Right.
the world and to make money and to provide, versus then, like, I get home and I'm like, to be a dad, well, I already did my job. There's nothing more to do. I brought the money home. And now, so it's like, no, but there's more to that. There's the being a dad thing. But then, so it's like, oh, but then now am I just a male mom?
Right.
And then, so that's what I thought you were going to say, was like they created dad programming that was
That too.
treated them as if they were moms. It's like,
Yeah.
you just
Yeah.
have to be more
Mm-hmm.
maternal or more,
Mm-hmm.
domestic, which
Yeah.
is not in our and generally in a man's nature. And so this idea of like, how am I a dad? I'm parenting my kid, I'm involved, I'm active, but I'm also a man. Yeah, that's what you discovered, was there was a gap there. Instead,
Yeah.
you were just
No.
trying to guilt trip men into essentially serving their wife. Like, you need to help your wife with parenting more. You need to help her be a better mom to your kid. And, you work for her more like a boy, which of course women complain about, this idea that my husband is a helper rather than an equal owner. And they have to ask for everything. And certainly how my dad thought was like, why are you complaining? I help whenever you ask. And she's like, I don't want you to just help. I want you to like see it and do it.
Yeah.
And you're saying the whole society saw men this way, as they either saw them as male moms or as boys that were supposed to help out their partner, aka mom.
Right. Yeah, no, this we have to get our hands around and accept this whole notion of evolution, right? We are evolving, right? And so the importance of understanding that is knowing that you can't hold it against me for what made me who I am. And so, yes, if we go back 30, there are some things, all the stuff that you just talked about, where those things were normalized. Like if you watch, I love old TV, but sometimes I see some shows, some old shows back in the 70s, even the early 80s, but definitely in the 70s. And you see some of the normalized dynamics between men and women, and you're like, whoa.
Hmm.
Right? It's like, okay, you won't see that today. But you won't see that today because there's evolution. And so if we have accepted the rightful evolution of what is happening with women and moms today, we have to equally recognize and accept the evolution of what's happening with men and dads today. It's just changing,
Yeah.
right? And so, and everybody doesn't change at the same time, right? It's a wave. Some people change, some people don't. And then you got the generational factor that's happening right now, right? You have the baby boomers who are still holding on for dear life, for tradition, for it not to change, right? And then you got the Generation Zs and the Alpha babies trying to break that thing right on down so they can escape and get away from all of this stuff that holds them to this thing we call tradition, right? And we're trying to function in the middle of all of that stuff and try to find some normalcy. And I think that the only way that we get to that conversation is where we are now. Undoubtedly, it's okay for us to have different conversations in different rooms. I think where we hurt ourselves is when we don't come into a combined room with similar goals, respect for what everybody brings to the room without trying to control the conversation and being okay to agree to disagree,
Hmm.
right? That the reason that dads, I say this all the time. So you'll see a dad who is irate because he can't see his child for whatever the reason is. You can't dismiss the fact that the reason that he is irate is because of the love for his child, not for the hate of you.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And vice versa. It happens sometimes the other way as well, but in general, it's guys that are going through that. You can't dismiss that he still wants to be with his children desperately bad. And there are things that are serving as obstacles that in his logical mind makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. But in an emotional mind, you can justify.
And and it's a man value to tear down obstacles to your goals. That's like
Yes.
what a man does, you know, or to protect his children from some kind of harm, which could also be interpreted here as you're keeping me from my kid, which is harming them, as you know that does. And now you're the enemy,
Right.
even though it's the mom, or now you're an obstacle, even though it's the mom of his child, so there's some skills there, but that is interesting. It makes sense he'd be really mad.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. So then
Yeah.
if you can reconcile with that and recognize that, you can sit back and say, okay, yeah, like logically what you're
Your
saying
dad had fought for you,
yeah.
like your mom's parents stole you away, but if he wanted to, he would have, if he was really determined, he could have found you, he could have followed you, he could have insisted to be in your life, so like there was something going on in his psychology as well that said, oh, I'm not good enough, or I'm not wanted and he's better off without me. Is that the kind of logic you think he engaged in when your mom's family did that?
Absolutely. I think that, that back then there was probably less of a resistance than what you would get from men today
Yeah,
because
like you
he would
couldn't take
have
my
brought in.
daughter across the world, I wouldn't find her,
Yeah, he
like
would have brought into the
yeah,
notion of that kind of tradition, right? And then
yeah,
the whole community would support that and be okay with it, right? Now you could not do that. That could not happen. And so
mhm,
that's what I mean by accepting what
evolution.
is the evolution of
Yeah,
where
we
we
grew.
were and where we are.
Yeah. And
And
so from a governmental program perspective, because 'cause you've gotten involved at essentially the highest level in trying to prevent fatherlessness.
Hmm.
You discovered you can't treat men like boys and you can't treat them like women. So what programs do work? How have you been able to move the needle?
So what we've at Fathers Incorporated, what we have done is I've tried to see this work through my own personal lens and through the lens of everybody that I've served and everybody that I've grew up with and everybody that I've seen. And so I'm that guy who, when I go to the mall with my wife, I'd rather like sit down in the chair by the front door and just watch people walk in and out and tell their story. I'm a people watcher. I love kind of trying to understand who people are and why people do, what people do. And so uh, direct, sometimes the direct path to a destination is an indirect way, right? And so when it comes to this fatherhood work, what I've learned is that when many programs came into place and they wanted to kind of talk about, okay, so what's the real issue here as we see it, the federal government? Well, they're not working, they're not paying child support, they're not, they're not taking care of their kids. So let's create the child support system. Let's make them get back to work. Let's get workforce development programs. And then, we got fathers that are putting moms in danger. Let's send them through domestic violence awareness classes. Let's send them through anger management class. Everything is reactive to a behavior, right? All laws, all policies are reactive to a behavior. What we have decided to do here at Fathers Incorporated is, even though we have a fatherhood curriculum, that's not the first curriculum that they take when they come to us. The first curriculum that they have to take when they come to us is a life skills curriculum. I think people's issues are the lack of life skills, not the lack of being a parent. What is a life skill?
You train them to be a man
Right.
first,
Yes.
and then fatherhood comes from that. So life skills
Yeah.
like budget management or
So no, not even that.
yeah.
Communication. That's
Okay.
a life skill.
Like emotional awareness and
Emotional presence. That's a
relationship
life skill.
skills, honesty,
Integrity,
yeah, values.
compassion,
Oh, that's great.
personal presence.
Yeah.
All of that stuff are life skills. If I can get you to manage life skills, then once I start talking to you about being a dad, it starts to make sense,
Mhm,
right? You
mhm.
can say, okay, yeah. So me not paying child support is inconsistent with what my child expects of me. Consistency is a life skill, right? Being consistent. Children need consistency, right? So we see it as, yeah, but I gave her $15 this week and I gave her $30. Like, who lives like that? What if your boss told you, you know what, I'm going to give you a check on the 5th of this month here? And so no one is saying, from the fatherhood perspective, that child support is not a critical issue to take care of a child. But we're saying that how you build the capacity of men to understand the importance of that so that they see it differently. Because the way that they see child support is not through the eyes of their child. They see child support through the eyes of the system. And so when they're battling child support, they're not battling the responsibility of providing support for their child. They're battling the system. For our fathers, I have to get them around that and get them into a space where, no, you have a responsibility.
Find that an intrinsic motivation versus
Yes.
is another man value is to not be controlled. We
Right.
don't want anyone to control us.
Right. Right.
We wanna make our own decisions, and so
Right.
what you're saying is, like, you can decide to pay child support from your own sense of integrity and value for your kid, not because the system's making you, and on some level, the harder the system tries to make you, the more you're gonna rebel and say, "No, I'm not gonna do it if you tell me."
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So that goes back to all my the man stuff, right? The man stuff is, we really have to make sure that when we are providing services and talking about fatherhood specifically, that we are not dismissing the fact that we are also dealing with men,
We're
right?
dealing with men who have been treated like boys
Right, right.
and may even some level identify as a boy because they don't know what being a man is, or maybe think the definition of man is boy-like characteristics like aggression or fierce independence or consumerism or competition, which are more boy values.
And it's equal, right? Because we've gotten into a good place where we want to make sure that we speak and deal with women with respect. We want to make sure that we empower them, right, in their conversation. We want to make sure that we're compassionate about who they are and meeting their emotional needs. We're compassionate about all of those things when it comes to those kinds of things. Equally, we have to do the same things for men, right? And to your point earlier about our resistance to when we don't see that, it is not as a result always of this thing you're trying to get me to do. It is that you are taking a direct swipe at my manhood, right? You keep telling me that's what you want, but you want it your way. Like, and so we can mutually so then we get into where we are, we get in our marriage, right? So then how does that look in our marriage? It looks like two people who can mutually respect each other, who have similar goals and commitment to meet those goals, and are always going to meet each other where we're at. So it is my wife and your wife not talking to us like boys, and me and you not talking to our wives like they're girls, right? That's
Or
mutual.
or moms,
Right.
or
Or
or somehow our superior that we resent because they're trying to control us, but they can't control us because 'cause we're a man, but then, like, but then we're dependent on them as if they're our mom, and so, like,
yeah.
yeah, it's
Yeah. But this
and
is all language, Joe, that we haven't, we grew up not being able, well, not you and I so much, but we were raised by a generation that didn't think like that. Right. And so now we're shifting and we're having to figure out how to find common space in this place, right? And how do we get this right? And how did this become a part of our society where people are understanding that it's life skills we're missing, not being a man, being a woman, because that stuff comes innately. But how do we find the space to be able to understand how to get back to the principles of life? And that takes you down a whole nother rabbit hole, right?
yeah, you're flipping it all around for me. One of, the main goals of me starting Dedicated was the idea that being a father, having a kid is an opportunity to for personal growth, that it's an opportunity to become more of a man, to become more
Hmm.
powerful,
Hmm.
that's the opportunity men have that they get to choose to have. Women are kind of thrust into the transformation into a mom, but men, we have to decide, like, kinda day to day, are we gonna avoid, or are we gonna let this work us? And
Hmm.
and so but what you're saying is almost the kind of natural opposite, which is also in order to be a good dad, if that's my intention, or if it's society's intention to create better dads, then we need better men. We need to create and nurture men. And nurturing myself as a man and understanding how to be a better man will therefore just naturally make me a better dad. All the dad skills are the natural outputs of good men: integrity, responsibility, modeling, uh, correct behavior, honesty, groundedness, power, safety. These are all man values that make great dads too.
So if you and I, we ask ourselves the question, so then why is father absence so impactful on children? Right? Because the lack of being able to see another man model a life skill is detrimental to a child that then impacts them as an adult. That's why
I
father
mean, they don't know
absence.
what a boy doesn't know how to be a man. He stays a boy,
Yeah.
and women don't, and girls don't know what a real man is, and they end up dating or marrying boys.
Right.
And so they
Right.
like, they only know boys, and
Yeah,
yeah.
and that's a natural evolution, right? It happens in the day-to-day interaction between parents. Like, our parents didn't sit down, at least mine, my mom didn't. She didn't sit down, this wasn't the Waltons. After every episode there was a moral and there was like we sat down and Papa told us the moral of the day. That didn't happen. We just lived, right? And that lived experience taught us something because we saw a pattern of behavior, right? I saw my mother be compassionate, right? I saw my mother have integrity. I saw my mother do X, Y, and Z. And although that wasn't a curriculum every day in our lives, it became part of the nature of who I am. And so those characteristics followed me even into becoming a father. Now, I failed at some of the mechanics in that, but I never lost my understanding of me not being a man of integrity during that time.
Mhm.
And that was what was tearing me apart because there was something that was a part of me that wasn't aligning with my behavior. Right. And so, right now, when we're looking at homes where and we have to kind of be careful sometimes because we're looking at these stats and we're looking at the number of out of wedlock households and female headed households. And we're trying to describe those households as households that do not have any measure of father presence. And that's not necessarily true. Just because they don't live in the same house doesn't mean that there's not male and fatherhood presence around those children. So we have to be careful about how we are describing what we're describing. And then we're also making an assumption about the environment that the child is in, right? That the child is in an environment that there's no men there. That's not true either. And so, but then where do those lessons and so we really have to, and I don't know the answers to all this, Joe. You and I having a conversation, I'm getting a little more frustrated in my mind right now. It's like, because how do we get to where we need to get to, right? And so, but ultimately, I think where we have gotten lost and where we need to find our way back to is this whole notion of community, right? And what does community look like? And community starts with family. And we have always said that family has no boundaries. But it seems like we have put boundaries around families and we don't allow them to construct based on the people that we love. We have allowed them to construct based on how people define family.
And you say we like society or we as
Yeah.
individuals?
Yeah. It's the infrastructure,
The
right?
nuclear family of like, oh, it's you're the dad and the mom and the 2 kids and the dog and the white picket fence, and you're saying it's bigger than that. It's like extended
Bigger than that.
family and communities and friends
Right.
and yeah.
Yeah, but we don't feel like that. Man, I live in a neighborhood. And we moved into our house 5 years ago, 6 years ago. Other than my neighbor next door to me, I don't know the names of any of my neighbors in my cul-de-sac. When I grew up in Brooklyn, we lived in a building that had and I know this number because I always cite it. Our building had 94 apartments in it, 94. I knew as a kid the name of every person who lived in every apartment in that building because we used to play a game in the hallways as kids. We would just name out an apartment and we would just like say all the names of all the people who lived in the apartment. That's like that's the 70s. And now we're living in communities and neighborhoods around people for years on end that don't even talk to each other, right? Where when I go back and I look at where my family lived in North Carolina, everybody in that whole community, even if they weren't blood family, they were family because they lived together for tens and twenties and hundreds of years together. They weren't blood family, but they were family. And I don't know what has happened, in our life that has pulled that away, but I think that it has happened so much that now it has gotten even deeper and it's actually beginning to pull away what we have described as this kind of nuclear family. And somehow we got to get back to piecing that back together.
That's the long-term goal is create more extended family, more community resources, which, I believe in a lot, and it's the first advice for a new dad is get community, like, find other dads. get other people or like, a lot of people try to move near their blood family or they have, my mom lives with us about a third of the time she comes down, lives with us 2 weeks out of every, 6 weeks, and we only have the one kid and we can afford, housekeeper and nanny support, and we still need, still so much. So I can only imagine people that are lower income or separate from their blood family, trying to both work full time. Those economic circumstances either way, and if a dad feels like his job is still mostly to make money, and he can't keep up with the house and the fatherhood and make money, then he's sort of motivated to then go make money by society, even though he'd probably rather have more time with his kid.
Absolutely. And it's not going to happen on Facebook. Like, no matter how many friends you have on Facebook, ain't going to fill that hole of being lonely. Right. And so that's another reality that the newer generations have to deal with, right? Is how do they construct community,
Mhm.
right? Because their community has become virtual, right? And so we are very intentional as parents, particularly, my girls are grown and out and they have their own social circles. But more specifically for my son, emphasizing to him the importance of friendships in his school. That's why he's in sports, right? So he can begin to invest in these lifelong friendships with boys that are going to be in his wedding party, boys that are going to be with him at the hospital when he has his first baby, and boys who he's going to go to the game with and picnic with and go on vacation with, like really focusing on building those kinds of relationships now
Yeah.
with people. Because it was the one thing in my life that if I had one gift God could give me, and that was to put me in a circle that began in kindergarten that followed me all the way through the rest of my life. People who know you, right? Not people who just kind of met you a couple of years ago, but I'm talking like people who like really know you.
Mhm. Yeah.
And so, and I think that it's important, that we find ways to do that. I'm sure it still happens in many places around the country that are a little more smaller in size, lower in pace, more deeper in tradition than it does in Atlanta, Georgia, right? Brooklyn, New York, LA, it just happens a little differently. But it used to happen in churches, it happened in school, it happened in sports. But even those things have become virtual, right? And so nobody goes to the building to go to church anymore. They watch it on
Yeah.
YouTube on Sunday morning. They don't even go to their kids' games, particularly if they're low income, because now in a lot of these, AAU games and these high school games, they're charging as much as NBA games to go
Mhm.
see them,
Hmm. Yeah.
right?
Yeah, to see your kid play.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What can moms do to help support more engaged fathers?
S- you know, the first word that I wanted to come out of my mouth was supporter, but that is such a huge word,
Yeah.
right?
They feel like they need support. So what how do
Yeah.
they elicit
It
that? Or
it is empathy. Like empathy. Like, don't have sympathy for me. Sympathy is different. Sympathy is, yeah, I see what you're going through and I can feel you. Empathy is really putting yourself in my shoes, right? And really understanding what I'm dealing with, what I'm trying to express, and what I need, and you feeling that and understanding that from that baseline space. Because when I look at my circle, particularly circle of women that are around me, my wife, my daughters, some of my employees, they all have a level of empathy for who I am, and we all have a level of empathy for each other, right? It is me walking into a room or walking up to you, Joe, somewhere and saying, "Hey, what's going on, Joe?" And you're like, "I'm good." I'm like, something wasn't right about the way he said that. Right? And I'm like, "Nah, bro, what's going on with you, man? Because that didn't even sound right." That takes a level of empathy to kinda know when you're vibing with someone who is saying that they're good and they're not
Mm.
good. And
Yeah.
I think for women, I think the best gift that they can give any man that they're around, not only their husband or their boyfriend, but their sons, the people, their coworkers, is to listen with a level of empathy and not listen just to listen, right? And then be responsive, in what you hear when you hear it as opposed to ignoring it. And I think that men, for the most part, uh, will know. I think we know the people. I think I can look around my circle. You probably can too, and name the women in your circle, whether or not they happen to be your employees, business people, blah, blah, but you could probably name all of the people, women particularly, that are empathetic to you.
Mhm. Yeah, it's interesting, like, and kinda going back to treating them like a man rather than a boy, which is the first foot there's, like, you can have empathy for an equal, versus, like, if my daughter's, upset, like, I can have empathy for her, but there is sort of, like, this sort of, "Yeah, but you're just making a big deal because 'cause you're a kid, and okay, you hurt yourself, okay, it's alright," versus, like, and so I can see, in my own marriage where that happens, where she, treats me like I'm lesser or, like, or, I'm wanting empathy from her, and she thinks I want her to, like, take care of me. And she's already taking care of my kid, and she's already taking care of herself, and she's already taking care of the world. So, like, she doesn't wanna have to take care of me like another child. And I'm like, "No, I don't want you to take care of me. I want you to, like, as a equal, say, I get what that would be hard for you, that what you're
Yeah.
going through, that's tough." And,
Mhm.
like, that's, I think, hard for moms who are kind of feel like their empathy is sort of maxed out. They've already empathized with the whole world. They don't have anything left for their husband.
Absolutely. And that's why you have to, I've learned even with my son that our relationship, has gotten, much better and much sweeter because we ask more questions than make statements.
Mm, yeah.
Like, and so it's very simple. Like I said, like when was just saying to you, hey, nah, bro, what's going on? Right? Nah, yo, nah, I don't start my comment with you, right? Or I. It is what's going is a question because I'm trying to get information out of you to understand, but I'm also trying to get you to understand that I'm trying to understand, right? I tell people all the time that we talk to be heard, right? We argue to be right, but we communicate to be understood. We do
Mhm.
way too much talking and arguing, and we don't do enough communicating.
Yeah, that's good. I can also see where, like, the child support thing, where if you tell men, like, your intrinsic value to be responsible, but if you tell them it's the law, they don't wanna do it. I can see that happening in marriages too, where women become, like, the enforcer. They feel like you or the guilt trip, of, like, "You're not helping me enough, and you're not doing enough," and, like, this sort of, complaining or trying to, like, guilt trip us into helping versus like, "Hey, I know you're a powerful man. I know that you love us and believe in this family. Like, I'm not seeing that all the way right now. Can you, I won't you think you could show up some more?" Like, that's a very different approach to just, like, nagging,
Yeah, but
yeah,
it
it's like
takes a
more
mature
mom nagging a boy to clean his room
yeah,
versus an equal saying like, "Hey, you're not living up to the man I know you could be." And, like, I'm not, and I have empathy for the fact that it's hard to do that. Like, I get it, you're really taxed, but, like, I need, like, the family needs you, and
yeah,
I made this commitment, and I believe that you value that. Like,
yeah,
talking to men that way is
yeah,
it'd be very different.
yeah, I'm working on this curriculum now, and I have the 2 words, I have it in front of me, so I won't forget it 'cause it's a theme, but one of them is peaceful parenting, and the other one is co-parenting maturity,
Those are
right?
great. I have a
And
lot of
it
thoughts
is
on both of those if you want some feedback.
yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah.
And so it really is what you are describing is how do you find yourself and ensure that you are equally yoked with someone who has a commitment to peaceful parenting and they bring a level of co-parenting maturity.
I kinda wanna ask a sort of controversial question.
Go for it.
There's a lot of stereotypes around fatherless communities in the Black community.
Mhm.
Like there's somehow this association with Black dads abandoning their families, or that Black boys growing without family, and a lot of the challenges are because of the fatherlessness and all this stuff. Like, I'd just love to hear your perspective on that. Is it even true that it's more than
Mhm.
proportionally Black families that struggle with this? Is that just an exaggerated stat? If so, like, what would that being? We assuming that it's not inherently uh,
Mhm.
it's
So
not
there's a couple of things.
race-based,
There
but
is,
it's something more, yeah.
so let's always start with the statistical truth,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
The statistical truth right now, is about 70% of all children in the African American community are born into out of wedlock households. That is a statistical truth, right? But again, I said earlier that just because a child is born into an out of wedlock household doesn't mean that they're born into a fatherless family.
How
Right?
does that compare to other racial groups?
So it's about 50. It's been a while since I've looked at that number because it's changing a little bit. It's about 50 some odd percent for Latino families, and is probably approaching the high 30s, the low 40s for white families,
Okay. So it's very
right?
high for Black
Yeah,
people.
it's
Yeah.
high for all of us.
Yeah.
And so,
Yeah,
and
high
so
for
once
everybody,
you,
really. Yeah, that's a lot.
yeah. And so what you're looking at when you look at those high, and so the Moynihan Report, which came out in 1965, Senator Patrick Moynihan did a report called the Moynihan Report, and it looked specifically at Black families. The irony in that report is that time, the out of wedlock birth rate for Black families was 35%. And he called it back then in 1965 a travesty. And so if it was a travesty in 1965, what is it today? And so, and if you go just based on that baseline number, it's a travesty for everybody. White families, Latino families. The only thing that has escaped is Asian families. They are still very high with
Mm,
respect to married
sure.
families.
Yeah.
And so if we're gonna compare ourselves or look at a litmus test, we need to start figuring out what they're doing, right? Because they tend to, be at those high statistical spaces. And so then you have to kind of walk yourself around it to kind of say to yourself, what does that mean? When you have high percentages of your children being born into out of wedlock households. And basically, what it means is, there is a perception out there today about how people are cohabiting, how people are coming together as couples, and how people are making those kinds of decisions. And then when you begin to start looking at the way that those take place over the generations, this newer generation, Alpha Gens and Generation Z babies who are now into childbearing ages, they have less of a value for marriage than the traditional generations do. And so you are more likely to be born today into an out of wedlock household.
Mm, yeah.
Take my youngest daughter, for instance. My youngest daughter just had her first child 2 years ago, in a relationship with a young man who grew up in a married household, well, divorce, but professional household. Great guy, great background, great drop. After about a year and a half ago, they decided to break up, but they are still co-parenting their child very equally without the government being in it, without his parents being in it. They are moving the baby back and forth. Nyla's just flourishing. She's just doing what we want to be done. But that was because there was behavior that they saw. There was an expectation and life skills to understand that, you don't have to be in a relationship to have a relationship.
Yeah. They'd fall in the statistic, but it's not actually a problem.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's ding, 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 ding.
Yeah.
That's it, right? And so, when you look at Black communities, then you have to take into consideration historical perspectives and things that has happened with governmental programs and the communities that they grew up in. Then you have to break it down demographically. You can't just frame the entire Black community by low income communities, because low income communities are impacted by many other things, unemployment, crime, than middle class, than upper class. We're not in communities like we were before, where everybody grew up in the same community. You know, Georgia's a perfect perspective, a perfect example. You would come into Georgia and you would think all the black people live in Atlanta. No, they live everywhere in Georgia. They even live in the Appalachian Mountains, and I know that they're up there because my son's games are up there, and they're in the stands. Their kids are on the team. They're on the cheerleading team. They're in the spaces. And so when you look at, all of that stuff, and then lastly, Pew Research 2013 US Census did a report on engagement behavior of dads. And the 2013 report revealed that particularly African American dads are the most engaged dads in day-to-day activities in the lives of their children than any other cohort of dads in the
No
country.
way.
Changing diapers, reading
Huh.
books, taking them to school. And so what you see is in not only African American communities, but white communities and Hispanic communities, that fathers are very deeply engaged and it's not connected to relationship
Hmm.
circumstance,
So
right?
interesting. So they have the highest rates of non-marriage,
Yes,
but also the highest rates of dad engagement.
right. Absolutely.
So
And
interesting.
you can see it. One of the places we see it a lot when I used to have a program called Real Dads Read, and we used to do some literacy stuff in schools. And we would be at schools in the morning. And because we're in the South, there are a lot of people, a lot of kids get dropped off. The vast majority of parents that you see in the morning dropping off their kids are dads. And a lot of times it's because they're dropping off the kids and they're going to work or they come
The
from work.
stereotype that yeah, that the black dads are just more likely to be absent and are far away.
Yeah.
Not true is basically
Yeah.
not true. You're saying like
No,
they're
it's
actually
absolutely not
most
true.
engaged of any racial group, like more
Right.
engaged than white dads, even
Right.
though they're married or whatever.
Yeah,
Just
and
being
so
married
you
doesn't
see them
make you an
at
engaged
games,
dad.
right?
Yeah.
Even, I love that I can kinda see family formation at games, basketball games across the country. And I'm like, if you wanna see the engagement of men in the lives of their children, go to sporting events. I mean, women too. Women are down. They're they're getting more out of control than men are. But
Yeah.
it's a cool thing to see because it's like, where are the men? They're right here. They're all over the place. It's families, it's men, it's boys, it's girls. They're everywhere. And so, once you start, stripping apart, the reality, from the stereotypes of what's happening across culturally across families in America, what you begin to start seeing is that they're all very similar in terms of what's happening. There's a concentration of what you see in other places because the media tends to lean on some communities more than they lean on. The negative aspect of those communities seem to be higher in many spaces than other. And then there's this historical, perspective that just says, yeah, it's just them, it's just them, it's just them, right? And so, but it's really not the case in our programs here in Metro Atlanta. Everybody comes to our program. Metro Atlanta is 70 some odd percent African American, in many communities 90%. But we are still getting white dads, Latino dads, and other kinds of dads coming in. And you know what? They got the same problem all the rest of them have, right? The nuance is the same. They're dealing with the same systems. All of those things look the same. Um, we have if I'm going to describe what's happening in our country right now, we have a fatherhood challenge, but a family crisis.
Yeah.
Fatherhood challenge is that we have not figured out how to begin to look at fatherhood as the solution to many of our societal ills. And as a result of that, we are creating a family crisis. And that is for everybody, right? And so when we begin to start looking at fathers as a solution to many of the things that we're going in, what does that look like? It looks like supporting them. It looks like empathizing with them. It looks like, recognizing them. It looks like inspiring them. It looks like, it looks like all of those things, right? And so once you start doing those kinds of things, you'll begin to start seeing things stabilize, a little bit in family. And we won't be, again, it goes back to you had asked me a question about, or I said something about how we're looking at families and society has, we always thought that family was, mom, a married mom and dad, daughter, son, dog, in a big house behind a white picket fence, right? That's what family look. That's not family today. Family looks like a lot of
Yeah.
different ways. But when you look at it statistically, you start making assumptions about what is happening with families. And that is not the definition of family today. Family does not look like that. And so we have to really, when you look at what's happening, I get to have a great bird's eye view, or have had a great bird's eye view as to how the different administrations has seen family and how they look at it and how they think about it and how they go about their political business of dealing with what they think is going to work for families based on how they believe about it. And basically, I've done our federal work through 4 administrations. We were there for the transition between Bush to Obama, from Obama to Trump, from Trump to Biden, from Biden to Trump again.
Back to Trump. Yeah.
I've been there through all of those
Wow.
transitions. I've watched it. And what I know when I'm talking about themes is that each and every last one of them had a profound care for families. They wanted to do something about families. They just thought about it differently, and
Bipartisan issue. We all have families.
yeah,
Yeah.
and they just had a different mindset on how they would go about strengthening families. On the blue side, it has always been, for the most part, it has always been services, programs, and funding. On the red side, it is marriage, work, right, and faith. All of them have always been present in the conversation. It just did this, right?
And they're sort of both neither of them are wrong.
And know that the number one priority in whatever we do is about children. It's not about us as adults. It's about what are we doing to ensure that our children can thrive in healthy environments, and what can we do to strengthen those environments. Family tends to be the core of that conversation,
Yes.
but
Families
there's
help the
so many
children.
things, there's so many things to strengthen. We're just not gonna get to all of it,
Yeah.
but we at least gotta start.
Yeah. Children are the priority. Good families bring good children, and fatherhood is the solution, or at least a big solution
A
to
solution.
the family crisis.
Absolutely.
And yeah, that's the work we're doing. So I love that. Yeah, and let's treat fathers like men and help men be better men, and they will be better fathers. And that's the spirit. Is it's not raising male moms. We're not trying to guilt trip boys into helping out their partner.
Mhm.
We're, treating men like men and appealing to their innate nature as men to be great dads.
And
So
the challenge too is, I've said this when I've spoken to, I used to do a, class, Joe, called, Standing in the Gap, Single Mothers Raising Boys. And I used to always ask the question, tell me when a young boy becomes trifling. Because that's just a saying you always hear, trifling boy. Since all of you have sons, describe for me the date that your son will become trifling. And they can't come up with that date. And it's like, so what makes a boy trifling, right? And if you describe a man as trifling, then you have to give me the date that he became trifling, and then you have to explain to me how he became trifling, right? And so if we're just talking about societal rhetoric, if we're just talking about societal rhetoric, we have to stop doing that, particularly if you are moms raising boys. Because if that is your thought, that at age whatever he becomes trifling, then what are we doing?
yeah,
And what are you doing?
Yeah.
right? Because we can look at track record, right? Because on one hand, we can talk about all the things that, we need to do for single moms and, all the resources and funding and all the things that we have to into place, rightfully so, deserving and all of those things. But it's on your watch, right? And so you can't keep, saying, I don't need a man. I don't need a man because that could be possibly true. But here's what's not true. While you don't need a man, doesn't mean your child doesn't need one.
Hmm.
Distinguish the two
Yeah.
because your not needing one has absolutely nothing to do with your child not needing one.
Yeah.
Right. And if your whole life and psyche is about eliminating him out of the process and out of the space, you're doing your child a disservice.
Mhm.
I
Yeah.
think those are the intimate conversations we got to start having because there's a different kind of public conversation that people talk about because it's part of the societal dialogue, right? But then there's those things, Joe, that you sit down and your wife says to you quiet in the corner and you're like, "Ooh, okay." It's like, yeah, never
Mhm.
thought about it that way before.
Yeah. Right. Well, this has been super awesome. Where can people learn more about your work, get involved?
I'm all over the place. I tell her,
Yeah. Tell us all.
Google me, right? And go spell my name right, you'll find me. And
Uh-huh.
so, but our organization, Fathers Incorporated, is at www.fathersincorporated.com. That is the gateway to everything that we do, including Gentle Warriors Academy, which is our direct service arm, Papa University, which is our online resource for dads, and the Moynihan Institute for Fatherhood Policy and Research, which is our need to begin to start telling our story from a research perspective. Our YouTube and all of our social media pages are around Fathers Incorporated. And so we don't hide. And so if you spell our names right, you'll find us.
Yeah. It's great. Well, yeah, we'll definitely stay in touch and we'll see where it goes. Excited to hopefully see you at the conference.
Yes.
And everyone else, please subscribe to this to help us reach more dads. Like and follow if you want to share this with a dad or family you think would be valuable. And I'd love to hear in the comments what you think the biggest challenges facing fatherhood today are. So with that, thanks so much and stay dedicated.